Sit back and listen to this extremely interesting story.
Becky walked around her dorm room. She was deep in thought, ignoring her roommate who she had undressed and tied to a chair after the girl had made her breakfast over an hour ago. The moans of Jenna, who could feel the device working, were now nothing more than white noise. "What's wrong with Mom?" Becky asked again, glancing at Jenna. The poor girl was in the agony of another pleasure. Only the whites of her eyes were visible, and her skin, completely drenched in sweat, was a pleasant dark red. "I guess the only way to figure this out is to go see her," Becky reasoned. With the speed that comes with lots of practice, she released Jenna from her bondage and guided her to the bed. Jenna needed no instructions. She did as Becky required. In just a few minutes, Becky felt the pleasure. Satisfied for a moment, Becky left Jenna and got dressed. Before she left, she tossed a couple of appliances at Jenna. The smaller one was about the size of Jenna's forearm, and the larger one was closer to the bottom of her leg. "Start small until you learn. I hope that by the end of the week you will be able to work with more without help, of course." Jenna was shaking as she picked up the tools. They were much bigger than anything she'd seen so far, and she wasn't sure she could pull it off. From the first week of sharing a dorm room with Becky, she had no choice. Looking at Becky, Jenna knew she had no choice but to try. "Yes, mistress," Jenna said, a quiver in her voice the only indication that she was afraid. "Good girl, I might not be back tonight. If you need anything, call Emily." Jenna shuddered. She enjoyed the things her mistress made her do, but Emily was entirely different. Emily enjoyed tormenting her. Becky finished packing her overnight bag and headed out the door, leaving Jenna to wonder how she had gone from a high school cheerleader who picked the football team to a submissive little girl in less than a month of college. The drive to her parents' apartment was uneventful, which did nothing to distract Becky from the internal conflict she felt from her mother lying to her. Did someone appear to her, or was it even worse? Becky thought as images of her mother using illegal substances or being forced to spend time with someone for money flashed through her mind. She pulled into a parking spot near her mom's car. "It's still in the same spot it was in yesterday," she thought as she walked by it toward the building her parents lived in. The only hesitation she had was at the door. Becky didn't know if she wanted to know what was going on. Her mother was one of the few people she admired. She paused a few seconds before she knocked. No answer, just like yesterday. A few seconds went by with no answer, so she knocked again. Still no answer. Becky was digging in her purse for the spare key when she heard the locks being turned. Jen opened the door and found her youngest daughter standing there, her hand in her purse, getting ready to let yourself in. Jen asked, smirking. "Ah, no." Becky retreated, releasing the keys. Her mom just raised her eyebrows. "Fine, you caught me." Becky smiled, sticking her tongue out. "Well, since you were going to unlock the door, you might as well come in." Jen stepped aside, walking away from the door. Becky watched her mom walk toward the kitchen. "It looks like she has lost weight, and what is up with the red hair?" she thought, frowning. Her mom had never dyed her hair before. Jen sat down, picked up a cup of coffee, and took a drink. Becky grabbed her favorite cup from the cupboard and fixed herself a cup before sitting across from her mother. "So, why red?" Becky asked, deciding to get the new hair color out of the way first. Jen had forgotten Doris had dyed her hair yesterday. Jen worked hard to keep her face neutral, took another drink, and replied, "It's been really boring around here, so I decided to try something new." Jen looked into her coffee. "It's been that way since your dad's out-of-town assignment started." She didn't even look up. Becky picked up on the bitterness in her mother's voice. "Sorry, Mom." Becky softened, wondering if she should have come by more often. Then she remembered her mother had lied about being home yesterday. "I'm sure Dad isn't having any fun being out of town without you," Becky assured her mother. Time to change the subject, Becky thought. Any plans for today? Jen grimaced. The stress and extracurricular activities Camilla had her doing had started to impact her work, and it was showing. Her boss had made a comment a few days ago about her productivity dropping. "I've got a report that needs to be finished for work." She glanced at her daughter. "I guess that will be most of my day," Jen declared, the bitterness still in her voice. Mom needs to talk to someone, Becky thought. grabbing her mother's hand and holding it gently. "You know I am always just a phone call away. I know, you also have your own life, Bika." Jen finally smiled, finding it ironic that her daughter was trying to mother her. "If you won't call me, I have the numbers of some really good therapists. I don't need a therapist." Jen assured her daughter, "You need someone to talk to." Becky insisted, "Let's leave it at that, shall we?" Then Jen wanted to talk about something else. Well, almost everything else. She was still trying to piece together what had happened last night. She saw flashes of the men who were with her, and judging by how tired she was, part of her was glad she didn't remember, for now. Becky stated firmly, looking at her mother over the rim of her coffee cup. "You are so much like your dad sometimes." Jen rolled her eyes, but she was still smiling, so Becky took that as a win. They visited for a little while before Becky left so her mother could work on her report. Since she was already in the building, she decided to stop and see Donald. She knocked on the door, and a few minutes later, a disheveled woman answered. Her hair was a mess, and her mascara had run like she had been crying. Taking in the fact her blouse was wrinkled and one button off, Becky thought she knew what had happened. "Can I help?" The woman started to ask Becky before Becky cut her off. "Go get Donald. That is, he." Becky pushed past the woman and walked into the apartment. "Hey, who do you think you are? Donald?" Becky shouted, ignoring the woman who was trying to grab her arm. "Hey, Becky." Donald looked at her in confusion from the couch, missing a piece of clothing. "You can't be in here," the woman shouted back, finally grabbing Becky's arm now that she had stopped moving. Becky twisted and pushed, easily tossing the other woman onto the living room floor. "Don't ever touch me without my permission." Becky snapped, anger engulfing her. The other woman looked shocked and ready to cry. Becky didn't care. Her fury shifted to Donald. "What's going on, Donald?" Becky knew her nostrils flared when she got angry. For some reason, this made her angry. "I was excited and well, she was here so I decided to." As he spoke, the volume and tone of his voice continued to drop under Becky's withering gaze. "What have you decided? To spend time with her, Donald?" Becky asked as she approached him. He sank down as deep as he could on the couch cushions. "I just wanted to have a little fun." He shrugged, sulking. "If you wanted to have some fun, you could call me. Who knows, I might come, and if you were a good boy, I'd let you have a lot." Becky hurt Donald. "I'm sorry, Becky." Donald apologized. "Who the is she?" Becky demanded, pushing down slightly as she turned her attention back to the woman cowering on the floor. "Her name is Kathy. She used to live next door. Mom gets her to watch me every once in a while." Becky turned her gaze to the other woman. She looked to be in her early 20s or early 30s, with short, dirty blonde hair and a slender figure. "Have you ever spent time with her?" Becky asked, enjoying the humiliation of the other woman, who looked shocked by the question. "Yes," Donald said, looking away from Becky. Kathy blushed and looked at the floor. Becky pulled her foot off Donald and walked up behind Kathy, grabbing a handful of Kathy's hair. "When was the first time?" Becky inquired, forcing Kathy to look up at her. Donald cleared his throat. "A few years ago, I think right after I turned 18. She moved to live next door to her husband." Katie shuddered when Donald mentioned her husband. "It pissed me off that my mum thought I still needed a babysitter, but got over it when Katie came along. She was wearing yoga pants that showed off her figure. I spent time with her twice before Mom came back that night. Since then, every time Katie watches me, I do it." Donald boasted. Kathy looked like she wanted to crawl into a hole and bury herself. "And what about her husband? Does he know what his little bride was doing here?" Becky asked, lifting Katie onto her lap by her hair. "Ouch, that hurts." Kathy complained, grabbing onto Becky's hands. "Let go now." Becky scolded her, leaning down until their faces were inches apart. Kathy hesitated a second before dropping her hands, more afraid of Becky than the pain. "What does your husband say about your Donald?" Becky growled as she tugged harder on Katie's hair, snapping her head back and to the side. "Nothing anymore. We're divorced," she said through gritted teeth as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Why? Did he find out you were fucking in 18? Your old housemate?" Kathy started crying. "So he did find out." Becky glanced at Donald. "Did he come over and want to talk to you about it?" So, he came up and started shouting at me. The dispute spilled over into the corridor. He was getting louder and then he slapped me. Donald rubbed his cheek, smiling at the memory. I couldn't believe it. He slapped me. He laughed. What happened after he slapped you? Becky prompted when Donald paused too long. I picked him up and slammed him against the wall. I saw Katie behind him, crying and rubbing her cheek. I assumed he hit her a few times before coming to talk to me. I lost my temper and squeezed his neck. His face turned a deep red as I watched the threads stand out from his neck. The smile on his face was gone, replaced with what looked like regret. Mom and Kathy tried to get me to let him go before he stopped breathing. I am guessing you did since you are here right now, Becky commented, releasing some of the strain on Kathy's hair. Yes, I saw Katie slide to the floor with her hands over her face. She cried uncontrollably. I didn't want to be responsible for her feeling that way, so I let him go and went back to the apartment. Mom came in later, telling me he had threatened to call the cops. He dropped the whole thing on account of my disability and because everyone saw him hit me first. So the man wasn't happy about you hanging out with the neighbor boy. Becky turned back to Katie. No, he was very angry when he thought that I had a child because of the boy next door. She admitted. Becky raised an eyebrow. That's how he found out. I was about a week late and freaked out. I wasn't late before, so I bought a test at the chemist. Simon, my ex-husband, worked long hours, so we didn't spend time together for 2 months. He found the test at dumpster and ran into me. He lost it when I told him about Donald. After the fight with Donald, he didn't talk to me for almost a week. When he did, he told me if I wanted to stay married, we were moving. After the move, we tried to make it work, but it didn't. So now when Camilla calls, you come over and hang out with Donald. Yeah, Kathy closed her eyes. Becky looked at Donald. He confessed, Becky thought, but smiled as she looked at Donald, unable to be angry with him. So what do you want to do? Becky, questioned Donald, letting Kathy's hair go and walking over to sit in a chair. I want pleasure. Donald answered honestly, looking between Becky and Katie. Don't look at me. Our relationship isn't advanced enough for me to please you after being caught with another girl. Becky told him. She looked at Katie with a frown. Of course, this girl will need to get permission before she's allowed anywhere near you again. Looking toward the TV, something caught her eye. Camilla has a Nana cam sitting on the bookcase, Becky thought as her eyes slid over the device. Pulling out her phone, she looked at Kathy. Leave your clothes. What? Kathy stammered, unable to believe what Becky had just told her. I told you to get rid of your clothes. Now, Becky ordered. Becky turned her phone toward Kathy and started recording as the other woman slowly stood and began removing her clothes. Donald was grinning as he watched the dynamics between the two women play out, remembering the battle of wills he had with Becky the first time they met. Katie walked slowly, not wanting to do this but also not wanting to annoy Becky anymore. It was good for Becky. Katie's actions served as a cover while she hacked the Nana cam. Camilla didn't change the factory password, Becky thought, as she walked over to the camera. From there, she connected the cloud storage and its archive. She changed the passwords to keep Camilla out and looked up as Katie finished doing what she said. Sweet, now come here, Becky ordered, tapping her foot impatiently. Sweet, now come here, Becky ordered, tapping her foot impatiently. After shedding the last of her clothes, Katie walked over to Becky, covering herself with her hands. Put your hands at your sides, Becky directed. Katie slowly spread her arms to her sides, standing still and shaking as Becky touched her. Have you ever spent time with a woman? Becky asked, running her hand over Katie. No. Kathy shied, her face showing what she thought about the idea of doing that. Well, we're going to have to fix that, Becky said, making Katie feel good. Now, since you've excited him, go take care of Donald. Kathy let out a sigh of relief, causing Becky to smile. I'm going to enjoy breaking this one, Becky thought. Go up to him and please him, Becky ordered. Katie turned away from Becky and headed toward Donald. Becky watched her as the woman walked up to Donald, admiring him. I bet she runs a few miles a day, thought Becky as she admired Katie's toned figure. Come on, girl, do it, Becky ordered as she joined in. Becky grabbed Donald by the shirt and kissed him. Donald wrapped his arms around Becky. The three of them were spending time in an unusual way, which made Katie protest. Becky told her to keep going and learn new tricks. Katie scowled at her. but did as she was told, not wanting to upset Becky. Becky watched as tears began to form in Katie's eyes as she turned back to Donald. "Gack," Katie pulled away. They almost felt sick. "Try again," Becky commanded. Katie tried several times and still did what was asked of her. "See, that wasn't so hard, was it?" Becky asked fondly, stroking Kathy's hair. Kathy felt proud of herself. Donald grinned. Looking at Donald, Becky said, "Now you have all the options. Take full advantage of them. You're the best, babe," he said as he grabbed 2 fists full of Kathy's hair. Katie started to pull away from Donald when she heard Becky's comment. "I won't do it," Kathy thought, angry that Becky had said that and that Donald had agreed. Donald began to please himself. At first, Katie tried to pull away but gave up. Donald was too strong, so she just let him do what he wanted, breathing when she could. Becky sat on the floor, slowly pleasing Katie. Becky was teasing Katie. Every time Katie got close to pleasure, Becky would stop and wait a few seconds for it to subside before starting again. She watched Donald, timing Katie's pleasure and his. After about 10 minutes of communication, they were on the edge. "Oh, are you close, baby?" "Yes." Donald and Katie were both pleased, after which he pushed her away from him. She fell to the floor, rolling over in the fetal position. Becky sat down next to Donald, carefully staying away from the mess they had made. Feeling better now, Becky smiled knowingly, leaning on his shoulder. "Yes, thank you," Donald grinned, kissing the top of her head. They stayed like that for a few minutes until Becky stood. She had things that needed to do today. Laying next to Donald while nice wasn't one of them. One last piece of business she realized before she left. Approaching Katie, Becky used the toe of her shoe to push her. "Get up." Kathy slowly pulled herself up. Her makeup was ruined, her eyeshadow had spread, giving her large dark circles around her eyes, and her mascara had left multiple lines down her face from her crying. Her lips were deep red and her eyes were bloodshot. Becky moved closer to Katie. "From now on, this is all you do for him. Do you understand me?" Kathy started to cry again. "Turn off the water plant and answer me." "Okay." Kathy stammered out, "Okay, what?" Becky was angry. "Okay, that's the only way we'll spend our time from now on," Katie replied. "The rest of you belongs to me. No one, not even you, does anything without my permission." Becky ordered, "You know." Becky asked again, hurting Katie. Katie stood up on her tiptoes, trying to shake off the pain. "Yes," Kathy finally bemoaned. "Now go over there and clean up the mess you left on Donald." Becky ordered as she let Katie go. Katie walked slowly to the kitchen to get a towel. "Where are you going?" "To get a towel," Kathy said, confused. "Don't you understand? Clean yourself without the help of a towel on your own." Becky ordered. "I hate this part of breaking in new subs," Becky thought. "It is so tedious." Kathy just looked at Becky, trying to decide if she was serious or not. "I do not recall saying that any of the instructions were optional or could be carried out in the future. Take it and put it away," Becky ordered, raising her voice a little, adding even more menace. Katie bowed her head, walked over to Donald, and began to do as Becky instructed. Becky watched Katie hesitate. "Are you on the pill?" Becky asked, trying to figure out why Kathy was hesitating. "Yes," Kathy answered, not looking at the other woman. "I guess I will come back to that later. You have to put this dirt inside yourself." Seeing Kathy's hesitation, she added, "Or if you want, I can ask Donald to help you." Katie quickly complied, making pained faces as she did so. Becky laughed at the disappointed look on Donald's face. Kathy had gotten most of the mess cleaned up at this point. "Tongue the rest, too," Becky ordered. Becky watched Katie do this, exciting Donald again in the process. He had already approached Katie. "Let her go," Becky growled in a low voice, "but you said." "I won't repeat myself," Becky said, looking at her nails instead of Donald. Donald didn't know what to do. Katie was so close, but Becky was sitting there and she had said no. Normally he wouldn't care what others say or think. He was excited and Katie was ready to chat. He glanced between the two women. Kathy looked afraid. Donald realized it wasn't him she was afraid of. She was afraid of Becky, who seemed like she wasn't really watching what was going on. Donald looked between the two women, back and forth, until he caught Becky looking at him. Once they made eye contact, he released Kathy. Some part deep inside realized she was dangerous in a way he couldn't name. Maybe that was why he liked her. You must not touch him today. Let this pain be a lesson. Don't talk to another woman without asking me first, of course. Becky looked at him, leaning slightly towards him. Donald felt himself falling into her eyes and found himself nodding. He had no idea how she did it, but he knew he would do anything she asked him to do. Good boy, get dressed. Becky instructed Donald before looking at Katie. Get dressed, but not completely. Becky observed as Katie reached for her clothes, but Kathy started to say something but stopped with a look from Becky. Katie wore a top. It got dirty on her. Her pants were just as bad. Katie held her remaining clothes, looking uncertain and unsure of what to do with them. Becky stood, holding out her hand to Kathy. Katie reluctantly gave the clothes to Becky. Becky walked into the kitchen and threw both garments into the trash, making sure they were on top. Looking at Kathy, don't touch them, she directed before walking over to Donald. I have got to run, Becky said, pulling Donald in by his shirt for a deep kiss that left both of them breathless. Remember, no more other women without permission, but you can still meet. Make sure she cleans up any mess she makes, just like today. Becky walked over to Kathy, who started to tremble as the other woman came close to her. Taking her hand, Becky lifted Kathy's chin, forcing Kathy to look at her. After I leave, get my cell number from Donald and text me about you in front of the bathroom mirror. I want you to look over your shoulder in the mirror and smile, Becky said as she moved closer. If you don't send a picture, I'll stop by where you work and you'll spend time with everyone there before I take you with me. Of course. Kathy's trembling got worse as she nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Good girl, Becky kissed Katie lightly, biting her gently. An involuntary moan escaped Kathy. I don't like women, Katie thought over and over, even as she found herself enjoying Becky's kisses. Donald had to hold back as he watched Becky befriend Kathy. Almost of their own accord, Katie's arms reached around Becky to wrap her arms around her. Becky shoved Kathy backward, her legs entangled with Kathy's, tripping the other woman and sending Kathy onto her back on the floor. Did I tell you about touching me without permission? Becky yelled at Katie. Katie felt tears welling up in her eyes as she fought the conflicting emotions of excitement, anger, and confusion. The other woman cringed, wanting to sink into the carpet. Turning toward Donald, can you believe her? Becky asked incredulously. Donald knew enough to shake his head. She's completely clueless. Kathy got up, ready to flee into the bathroom to escape Becky's torment. You don't even think about it. Becky stepped in front of Katie to block her path. Kathy stopped, frozen in her tracks. Now, what are you going to do when I leave? Get your cell phone number from Donald and send you a text. What kind of text? Becky queried, stepping closer to Kathy. Kathy fought back her tears. Yes, Kathy answered, not looking at the other woman. I guess I will come back to that later. You have to put this dirt inside yourself. Seeing Kathy's hesitation, she added, or, if you want, I can ask Donald to help you. Katie quickly complied, making pained faces as she did so. Becky laughed at the disappointed look on Donald's face. Kathy had gotten most of the mess cleaned up at this point. Tongue the rest, too, Becky ordered. Becky watched Katie do this, exciting Donald again in the process. He had already approached Katie, let her go. Becky growled in a low voice, but you said, I won't repeat myself, Becky said, looking at her nails instead of Donald. Donald didn't know what to do. Katie was so close, but Becky was sitting there and she had said no. Normally he wouldn't care what others say or think. He was excited and Katie was ready to chat. He glanced between the two women. Kathy looked afraid. Donald realized it wasn't him she was afraid of. She was afraid of Becky, who seemed like she wasn't really watching what was going on. Donald looked between the two women, back and forth, until he caught Becky looking at him. Once they made eye contact, he released Kathy. Some part deep inside realized she was dangerous in a way he couldn't name. Maybe that was why he liked her. You must not touch him today. Let this pain be a lesson. Don't talk to another woman without asking me first, of course. Becky looked at him, leaning slightly towards him. Donald felt himself falling into her eyes and found himself nodding. He had no idea how she did it, but he knew he would do anything she asked him to do. Good boy, get dressed. Becky instructed Donald before looking at Katie. Get dressed. but not completely. Becky observed as Katie reached for her clothes, but Kathy started to say something but stopped with a look from Becky. Katie wore a top. It got dirty on her. Her pants were just as bad. Katie held her remaining clothes, looking uncertain and unsure of what to do with them. Becky stood, holding out her hand to Kathy. Katie reluctantly gave the clothes to Becky. Becky walked into the kitchen and threw both garments into the trash, making sure they were on top. Looking at Kathy, "Don't touch them," she directed before walking over to Donald. "I've got to run," Becky said, pulling Donald in by his shirt for a deep kiss that left both of them breathless. "Remember, no more other women without permission, but you can still meet. Make sure she cleans up any mess she makes, just like today." Becky walked over to Kathy, who started to tremble as the other woman came close to her. Taking her hand, Becky lifted Kathy's chin, forcing Kathy to look at her. "After I leave, get my cell number from Donald and text me about you in front of the bathroom mirror. I want you to look over your shoulder in the mirror and smile," Becky said as she moved closer. "If you don't send a picture, I'll stop by where you work and you'll spend time with everyone there before I take you with me. Of course." Kathy's trembling got worse as she nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Good girl." Becky kissed Katie lightly, biting her gently. An involuntary moan escaped Kathy. "I don't like women," Katie thought over and over, even as she found herself enjoying Becky's kisses. Donald had to hold back as he watched Becky befriend Kathy. Almost of their own accord, Katie's arms reached around Becky to wrap her arms around her. Becky shoved Kathy backward, her legs entangled with Kathy's, tripping the other woman and sending Kathy onto her back on the floor. "Did I tell you about touching me without permission?" Becky yelled at Katie. Katie felt tears welling up in her eyes as she fought the conflicting emotions of excitement, anger, and confusion. The other woman cringed, wanting to sink into the carpet. Turning toward Donald, "Can you believe her?" Becky asked incredulously. Donald knew enough to shake his head. "She's completely clueless." Kathy got up, ready to flee into the bathroom to escape Becky's torment. "You don't even think about it." Becky stepped in front of Katie to block her path. Kathy stopped, frozen in her tracks. "Now, what are you going to do when I leave?" "Get your cell phone number from Donald and send you a text." "What kind of text?" Becky queried, stepping closer to Kathy. Kathy fought back her tears. They both took a drink. Becky was a little annoyed at the woman's toast, more so at her dad than at the woman. Her dad didn't even hesitate. The woman took Stan's glass and placed it on the counter before grabbing Stan by the shirt and pulling him in for a kiss. "Ugh," Becky thought, reaching to close the video capture app when she stopped herself. "No, I want to see what Daddy finds so interesting in this woman who cheats on Mommy." Becky excused herself. She ignored the thought that surfaced about a recurring fantasy she had about her father. He was an attractive older man who kept in better shape than a lot of men her age. "Yeah, one of these days I will have to talk to a shrink about some of the dark things that cross my mind. Wonder who they will talk to." The thought brought a smile to Becky's face. "I couldn't think of anything but getting back in the room so I could be," Stan admitted. Becky turned down the volume and turned on the music. "Ah, that's a lot better than listening to her dad tell another woman what he's going to do to her." Becky got up and put some popcorn in the microwave, glancing at the video while she fixed a glass of water. She paused the video, used the bathroom, and changed into a sleep shirt, not bothering to put anything on underneath. After putting the popcorn in a bowl, she sat down in the comfy chair and screencast the video to the large screen TV. After muting the volume, she resumed the video feed. Stan removed the woman's clothes, revealing her slender figure. "She doesn't have much of an edge," Becky judged as she munched on her popcorn. Stan and the blonde were hanging out. Becky forgot about the popcorn, pulled off her shirt, and sat naked in the chair, watching the video. Becky could see the excitement in her dad and couldn't wait to see him fully. She began to please herself, carefully taking her time. "Wow, Daddy has something to be proud of." Becky gaped as she leaned back in her chair and teased herself again. Her father's excitement was great, reminding her of Donald's excitement. The comparison made her giggle. "I must have really screwed up, comparing my dad to the man I'm dating," Becky thought. The realization that she might have feelings for Donald also caught her by surprise. I guess I need some time to think through a few things, Becky thought before turning her attention back to the screen. Her dad began to take pleasure in communicating with the blonde, at the same time polluting everything around him. Becky also enjoyed it, along with her father. Becky got off her chair and cleaned up the mess she had made before looking at the TV again. The woman was standing next to Stan, holding the ruined shirt together. They seemed to be arguing about something. The woman threw her hands up and stormed out of the frame, clearly pissed about something. I don't feel like dealing with this right now, Becky thought, still conflicted at how she felt about her father and the other woman. She closed the video capture and found a movie to watch. After the movie, she ordered dinner for herself and Carrie, out for Jenna. Have to make sure she eats, Becky thought with a smile. I ordered you takeout for dinner. Be sure to open the door without clothes and offer the driver a nice tip. Thanks, mistress, Jenna responded. Becky knew how much Jenna hated when she did that, but she also knew Jenna would do exactly what she was told, recording the entire thing for Becky to watch later. All of her other tasks were done. Becky stayed in watching movies until she fell asleep. Early the next morning, Becky left the hotel, still unsure how she would deal with her father cheating on her mother. Becky spent the morning out shopping and sightseeing. Around 10 a.m., she sent her dad a text, letting him know that she would be in town to have some papers for him to sign. They met at a restaurant next to the hotel for lunch. Hey, Becky, Stan greeted her, standing up next to the table and hugging his youngest daughter as she walked up. Hey, Dad. Becky smiled as she looked around the room for the blonde he'd been hanging out with yesterday. Not finding her, she sat down next to him. I was surprised when you texted me this morning saying you were on your way up here. You could have emailed me the documents, and I could have sent them back by courier, Stan informed her as he picked up a menu. I know, but I haven't seen you in weeks, and this seemed like the perfect excuse to come up here, Becky said, looking over her menu. They ordered lunch, and after the waitstaff left, Becky handed the documents she needed to be signed over to her dad. Stan looked them over and signed them. Becky put them away and looked at her dad. He looked much better than her mom and might have even lost a few pounds. You are looking great. Did you lose some weight? Becky queried. Stan smiled. Of all his kids, Becky was the most observant. Yeah, I cut back on what I have been eating and have gotten more exercise in since I got here, Stan admitted. I bet it's all blonde, Becky thought, almost smiling. Have you been by to see your mother? Stan asked, giving Becky the opening she needed. Yeah, I saw her yesterday. Mom's a mess, Dad. She has no one to talk to, and I don't think she is eating right or getting any exercise. Why don't you have her come up here for a few weeks? You know she is fully remote. It's not that easy, Becky. Your mother doesn't want to be here. She will not have a place to work like she has at home. Trust me, I asked her more than once, and the answer was always the same, Stan, Becky said. He told her part of the truth. At first, he asked her over, but after he started talking to Cindy, that conversation stopped. His new lifestyle would interfere with having his wife. There wasn't much conversation after that since lunch arrived. After lunch, Becky hugged her dad. Thanks for lunch, she said, picking up her things. You sure you don't want to stay? Maybe play some golf. I'm sure. I want to check on Mom, and I have a paper that is due. Becky said, okay. Love you. Stan hugged his daughter briefly before letting her go. Love you too. Becky returned the hug. Stan watched Becky walk away, part of him worried about Jen, but not enough to go back home. He felt guilty, but that lasted until he met Cindy in the lobby. Becky drove back to her mom's apartment, annoyed with her dad the entire way. He is more worried about having a new girlfriend than his mother. A recurring thought flashed through Becky's mind. She parked next to her mom's car again, walking the short distance to the building, and stopped in front of the door. Will she be home this time? Becky wondered as she knocked. A few seconds went by before Becky heard the latch rattle, and the door opened, revealing a tire. Looking Jen. Hey, Bika, 2 times in 2 days. Are you checking up on me? Jen was half joking and half serious. Can't a daughter come to see her mother without checking up on her? Becky smiled as she walked past Jen and wandered into the living room. It looked like her mom had been watching TV when she interrupted. Anything interesting? And not really. Another crime drama where some guy gets killed by hooking up with a married woman, Jen said as she turned off the TV. Becky smiled, finding the topic of the show ironic, as she handed her mom the school papers her dad had signed. I kind of forgot to have you sign these, Becky admitted. Shrugging her shoulders and smiling, Jen looked over the papers. I see your dad signed them, Jen commented, looking at Becky. Yeah, I went up and saw him. Figured that I hadn't seen him in a few weeks, and I saw you yesterday, so. Becky trailed off. Was he doing okay? Jen peeked, showing more interest than previously in the conversation. Yes, he had a new girlfriend, thought Becky. He seemed okay. He misses you, Becky added, unsure if it was true or not. Jen smiled and signed the papers, handing them back to Becky. The mother-daughter duo sat around and looked at old pictures and talked for a couple of hours before Becky looked at her watch. I have got to run, Becky said, getting off the couch. Well, it was good to see you, even if it was only for a couple of hours, Jen told her, giving her a hug. After leaving her parents' apartment, Becky went to see Donald, wondering if Camilla was home or if Katie was still there. Camilla opened the door, seemingly surprised to see Becky. Well, hello, Becky. I wasn't expecting to see you tonight. Camilla smiled, letting the younger woman into the apartment. Yeah, I stopped by to see Mom and wanted to see if Donald wanted to go out for a little while, Becky stated, walking through the kitchen into the living room. Donald. You have a visitor, Camilla yelled, motioning Becky to sit on the couch. Becky glanced down before she sat, making sure it was clean. Who is it? Donald asked, walking into the living room in shorts and a t-shirt. He was annoyed that someone was interrupting his game time. It's me. Becky smiled at him. Donald smiled, his attitude completely changing as he saw Becky. Hey, Becky. Donald stopped in the middle of the room, unsure what he was supposed to do. Why don't you go get dressed? This young woman wants to be with you, Camilla said, winking at Becky. Becky just smiled, unsure what her feelings for Donald's mom were. Something felt off, but she hadn't had time to look into it. Donald looked at Becky. She gave him a little nod before he turned around and went to his room to change. A few minutes later, he came back dressed in a button-down shirt and slacks, surprising his mom but not Becky. She had already explained the dress code for dates with her. See you later, Mom, Donald said as he walked behind Becky toward the door. What time will you be home? Camilla asked, feeling the loss of control and unsure when that had happened. When I get done with him, Becky confidently assured her, looking into Camilla's eyes. Camilla felt the contest of wills and thought for an instant that Becky would be like her mother. But she quickly realized that wasn't the case. 30 seconds stretched into a minute as the two women stared each other down. Donald looked between them, feeling awkward. Camilla was the first to look down, losing the battle of wills. Becky allowed a small smirk to show on her face. Don't have him out too late, Camilla said, not meeting Becky's gaze. Like I said, he will be home when I get done with him, Becky reminded her. Will that be a problem? The tone of the question was mild, but Camilla read the meaning. No, there isn't a problem. He is just my baby and I worry about him, Camilla professed, holding the kitchen chair for support. Glad to hear that. Come on, Donald, Becky said, walking out the door. Donald smiled at his mother and followed Becky. What just happened? Camilla thought as she walked over to the liquor cabinet and poured herself a drink. The short walk to the car was done in silence, with Becky leading the way. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Becky glanced at Donald. So, how was your day? Until you came over, pretty boring. I helped Mom clean and played games all day. Donald spouted out, reaching over and tentatively taking Becky's hand. Becky was surprised and annoyed that Donald touched her hand without asking, so she looked over and frowned at him. Why are you touching me? She questioned firmly. Donald swallowed but didn't take his hand away, so he has a little backbone, Becky thought, liking that as long as it didn't get in the way of him following directions. I like you and I think you like me, so I was wondering if you would like to. You know, Donald kept fumbling with what he wanted to ask. Hold that thought, Becky instructed, pulling into a drive-through and ordering dinner for them and Jenna. After leaving the restaurant, Becky looked sideways at Donald. Were you trying to ask me to be your girlfriend? Donald blushed a little and said, Yes, quietly. If I agree, there are some things you should understand from the start. I won't be in an exclusive relationship, and I won't necessarily let you know who I'm hanging out with. I don't mind you using other people, but you have to ask before you do or we're done. Do you understand? Yes. Donald affirmed, really not seeing the difference to what they had now. I'm in charge, Donald. That doesn't mean you can't try to change my mind, but there will be times when trying will get you into trouble. It's up to you to understand my mood. If I tell you to do something, I expect it to be done unless you can convince me to change my mind. You don't own me. If you start forcing me, I'll make you regret being born. Then we're done. If I need help figuring something out, I'll ask, of course. Yes. Donald assented, smiling at the thought of anyone trying to own Becky. Good boy, Becky said, lacing her fingers with Donald's. The car was quiet for the rest of the trip, each lost in their own thoughts. Becky parked in her spot, and the two walked to the dorm hand in hand, with Donald carrying the takeout food bags. Becky had a devious thought. Hold up, she said, sitting on a bench and pulling out her phone. I ordered takeout for you. I should be there any time. Open the door without clothes and offer the courier any tip. Yes, mistress. A few minutes later, Jenna responded. Becky tapped the seat next to her and Donald sat down. Take the food to room 143 in that building. Becky informed him, pointing at the one to their left. Knock on the door and you will be answered by a woman without clothes. She should offer you anything you want for a tip. Tell her that you want to spend time with her in an unusual way. Think of it as my present for asking me to be your girlfriend. Becky smiled. Donald smiled widely and leaned in, kissing Becky. They kissed for a few minutes before Becky broke the kiss by pushing Donald away with her palm. Go on before we end up fucking right here. Becky gasped, slightly out of breath. Donald grinned and picked up the takeout bags. With a single glance back at Becky, he walked into the building and knocked on the door to room 143. Jenna looked through the window to see a huge guy carrying takeout bags and took a deep breath before opening the door. She hoped that there would be no one else in the corridor and the boy would be scared, like the last one who saw her without clothes, and would just give her food without asking for anything. Thanks for bringing my food, Jenna said, blushing as the guy looked her up and down. Oh, that's nice of me. Donald smiled. Ready to engage with the 18-year-old standing in front of him, Jenna reached for the food. Donald initially didn't let her have it, but remembering Becky's instructions, he let go. Jenna thought there was a lot of food for just her, but she wasn't going to complain. Now, for the part she hated to say, but she knew if she didn't, Mistress would find out and she would be punished. Don't have any money for a tip. Is there something else I can do to make it up to you? Donald pretended to think about it, causing Jenna to sweat a little bit. Every second the door was open was one more second that someone might happen by and see her. Why don't you put the food on the counter while I think about it? Donald suggested. He wanted to see her figure. Jenna gave him a small smile but took the food and placed it on the kitchen table, giving him a perfect view of it. I am going to enjoy fucking that, Donald thought, smiling. Have you thought of anything? Jenna asked. Company policy says we can't accept anything like what you are offering. Donald began. Jenna felt her body relax. He was going to leave without asking her to do something. But since this is my last delivery, I think I'd like to have an unusual time, Donald said as he walked into the dorm room. Jenna felt her relief dry up, and the smile left her face as she realized what Donald had said. I wouldn't want you to get in trouble. Jenna desperately tried to tell him back. Oh, that won't be a problem at all. Donald smiled as he closed the door almost completely. Are you sure you don't just want to have fun? Jenna suggested. Of course, for starters. That way it will be easier for me, said Donald, taking off his clothes. Jenna watched Donald get excited. And he wants to do this to me, Jenna thought, excited and scared. Come on, girl, start, Donald demanded. Jenna began to please him. Becky walked in and stood to the side watching her roommate and Donald hang out. I might have to let them see each other more often, Becky thought to herself, pleasing herself. Oh, that's it, you're good. Okay, stop. I said stop. Donald ordered, pushing Jenna off him onto the floor. I want to make it unusual, growled Donald. Sorry, I got carried away. Jenna stammered. noticing Becky and turning a little white. "Do what you must," Becky ordered, sitting down in her chair to watch them. "Yes, mistress." Jenna agreed. They spent their time as Donald wanted. Jenna gradually enjoyed the process. Donald huffed, feeling on edge. Becky watched them both enjoy themselves and had it herself. It was wild. Donald admitted as he walked away from Jenna. "Clean up the mess you made," Becky said, pointing at Donald. Jenna started to clean up Donald. Without prompting, she cleaned up Becky until she was pushed away. Becky and Donald were sitting at the table eating takeout, while Jenna was kneeling on the floor eating hers from a bowl on the floor. Donald continued to look at Jenna, admiring her toned figure. "I'm here, kid," Becky snapped, tired of Donald ignoring her. Donald had the decency to look ashamed as he turned away from Jenna and looked at Becky. "Sorry, I'm not used to this." "You get used to it after a while," Becky stated nonchalantly, glancing over at Jenna, annoyed at the other woman, even though she knew it was irrational. "Hurry up and eat. I need to run you back before I can crash tonight." Becky reminded him, feeling the stress of the last couple of days. "I could stay here," Donald suggested softly. "Donald, until you can be around me and not be distracted by other women, you won't be spending the night. I thought I had been very clear on this with Cock's leave the other day." Donald tried not to look at the young woman who was next to them. "See, you can't help yourself." Becky lost it, standing up and grabbing her keys. "Come on," Becky said, moving to the door. Donald glanced at Jenna and smiled at her before leaving the dorm room. "Clean up the mess," Becky snapped, closing the door behind her. Jenna picked up the wrappers and put everything in the trash, hoping she wouldn't be punished when Becky returned for Donald's behavior. "Becky, Donald tried again to apologize. "I don't want to hear your apologies. If you want to be with me, you're going to have to learn to be with me and ignore what's going on around me, or we're gone. I'm not going to have this conversation with you again." Donald looked out the window, mad at himself for not having any self-control regarding women. Becky dropped him off at the parking lot of his apartment and drove off. She still had hours of videos she borrowed from Camilla to watch. Maybe one of the reasons she was mad at Donald was because he spent time with every woman his mother hired to watch over him. She was sure enough that if the woman didn't want it, he would force her anyway. Becky knew that her mother had watched Donald several times. Her mother simply would not agree to communicate with anyone but her dad. She took her vows very seriously, which meant that if Donald touched and fucked her mother, it was not without consent. "Let's figure out if it happened before you decide what you will do with Donald," Becky thought as she parked her car.
Subscribe to our channel so that your second C gaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.